Hi guys, I'm Natalie with Positively Primal, and this is the second video in a series with our allergy dog, Zuki. And I apologize, this took me a long time to get to. I have been incredibly busy and I still have to do this very quickly. But I do want to discuss what we're doing that is new and could potentially be used by people that isn't as complex as our allergy program, which we'll still cover, but we wanted to at least let you know what we're doing, and perhaps it could help some people who feel like there's no other options to help their dog at this point. So we are going to talk about poop, dog poop, and actually we're going to start with human poop. We're going to be talking about FMT, otherwise known as Fecal Microbiota Transplant or Fecal Matter Transplant, or just known as fecal transplant. Hopefully you've seen the video or the video series on the microbiome. This actually sets a precedent for everything that we're going to be talking about, so it doesn't sound so out there and crazy to you. First of all, we have the history of transplants. Animals do this. It's called coprophagy, where the animal will eat the feces of another animal. We can trace back human fecal matter transplant back to the 4th century, where it was first written down by a Chinese physician named Gu Heng. And later in the 16th century, it was called yellow soup, and that was used to treat digestive disorders. And more recently, in I believe the 1950s, around 1958, in the United States, we have started using fecal matter transplant to save thousands of lives every day with people who suffer from a bacterium called Clostridium difficile, or C. diff for short. This affects about 500,000 people each year, and about 15 to 30,000 people have been dying from it each year. And it's typically acquired in hospitals after a round of antibiotics. Traditionally, C. diff was treated with antibiotics, but the recurrence could potentially end up in death, and it would continue to recur. As weird as this sounds, in 2013 or 2014, the FDA in the United States designated poop as a drug, so it is now regulated, and they're only clearing FMTs for C. difficile. It's very commonly, it is the go-to practice to treat C. diff. You can go to the Mayo Clinic site, and there's about a 90 to 95% recovery rate with FMTs for this deadly pathogen. Some other things that they found from FMTs is that it can reduce C-reactive proteins, CRPs. Another study found that it reduces pro-inflammatory cytokines. And there was an increase of, I forgot the molecule, celadine. I'll put it on the screen. I'll have to look it up. Doing the FMTs increased this molecule that actually is restorative to the gut lining. So it helps restore the gut lining. And leaky gut or intestinal permeability is one of the underlying issues for a lot of these chronic diseases, because that's where even our beneficial bacteria can go through the wall of the gut and get into the circulatory system, causing havoc. And that's where you see those like itchy dogs that are responding to benign antigens in the environment, and the body turns on itself. So typically one of the first things we want to do is looking at healing the gut, and FMT does that, and there's some caveats to this which we'll cover. Also, FMTs greatly increase the diversity of the gut microbiome. It can reverse immune dysfunction. Two main considerations that we have with doing FMT for our dogs with allergies or atopic dermatitis. Typically, we start pretty hard and heavy with antimicrobials and antifungals, assuming that the dog has some form of small intestinal dysbiosis or candida. We definitely assume leaky gut. However, with our dog Zuki, even with these assumptions, she smelled like yeast, she has a lot of GI issues, we did not take that route. Of course, we wouldn't use antibiotics, which decimate the gut biome. We're going to go after this as a process of competitive exclusion, where we put the beneficial bacteria in that should hopefully crowd out the pathogenic bacteria. As much as I was dying to do a rotation of botanical antimicrobials, I did not, and I think another time I will, but I do believe this still went extremely fast. The other consideration with an FMT, which we actually addressed with our dog Zuki, is the underlying assumption of intestinal permeability, where the tight junction is open and bacteria can go through, and that's not just pathogenic bacteria. All the gram-negative bacteria can make lipopolysaccharides, and those can go through. So the beneficial bacteria can create issues by going through the tight junction. And we also assume that the mucin layer that helps keep out all that bacteria has been degraded. So we did two things. For about 2.5 weeks, I have to check the exact dates, we specifically targeted tightening up the epithelial layer of the intestinal tract, the tight junctions. So we're tightening up the gut, and we're also increasing mucin too. And I'm going to go into that in another video. We use like short chain fatty acids like butyrate. We actually don't use butyrate, but we do strategy to help increase the production of butyrate. One thing is resistant starch, but if you don't have a diverse microbiome, resistant starch can, the bacteria will actually turn that into ammonia instead of butyrate. So that's actually a complex discussion. We went into glutamine and other protocols first. So I'm going to leave that one for entirely another video. But we did do about a 2 to 3 week protocol with strategies to increase the mucin layer of the gut and help seal the leaky gut. We got our FMT from Animal Biome, and I think Holly said they have around a 70% success rate with AD cases, and I'm thinking maybe that 30% might have a couple things, you know, prepping that system, making sure there are no toxins, antibiotics. I would say you can't fix an automobile that's in the ocean. You need to get it out of the ocean, dry it off, and look at the parts to replace it. You can't replace it while it's in the ocean. That's the same thing with the ecosystem of ourselves and our pets. So we need to remove the pet from all the toxins, which is why we're making those little videos about, hey, look at your dog's environment. Remove those toxins, heal that gut, and then let's start doing these other protocols. So that was, we didn't do the antimicrobial, antifungal, which we typically do for all our cases. We absolutely did take a couple weeks before starting the FMT to seal that gut. In our couple weeks, we absolutely saw decrease of itching. She definitely felt better, but she was still sleeping a lot. When she ate, she turned bright red. We didn't look at which specific foods, unless it's a true allergy, or we're going to fix that anyway. We want to tighten that junction. And ultimately, the quote-unquote sensitivities shouldn't truly matter. And I wrote something about that on Positively Primal, about food sensitivity tests as a sacrifice to a diverse microbiome. We always want that diverse microbiome above and beyond. It's a sensitivity test. It is great to remove something temporarily, but in our program, we always rotate these foods back in that the dogs are sensitive to. And again, not anaphylactic shock, but a sensitivity. We rotate those foods back in. So we've had some adopters who said, oh my gosh, my dog, I ended up doing that test, and the vet said, my dog can't eat any of this. And we're absolutely not. You add them back in a small amount. Just make sure they're a clean source and not GMO fed, corn, soy, etc. Typical things that have been shown to create a response. My prediction was, yes, our program works. Typically a dog like Zuki would take a 6 to 9 months because of all those immunosuppressants, because of those steroids, because of those antibiotics. that destroys the immune system. I think I've put a list of what do antibiotics do. It decimates the microbiome. Watch the video in the microbiome where everything's going to come back to the microbiome and the mitochondria. So watch that video. I think it was really, really simplified down to the functions and importance of the microbiome. So that diversity is key, and it's key across species. A predictor of health is a diverse microbiome. So that's been, paramount. We want to increase that diversity. There are caveats to everything. We don't want to start an allergy dog or a dog with intestinal permeability with a diverse diet, because all those different foods are going to be leaking in. The body is going to go haywire. So we tend to pick a couple novel proteins and we ramp up fairly quickly. And that's if this, then that. We do short-term ketogenic diets. However, if you have metabolic endotoxemia, you can have 80% of your gram-negative bacteria escaping in through your gut, especially saturated fat. Saturated fat has some of the worst lipopolysaccharides. It wouldn't matter if the gut is sealed, because it would just go through the digestive system. The reason that we want to fix the gut before doing a ketogenic diet is because it gets into the circulatory system. So we're not saying keto is bad, it's just bad if you have intestinal permeability. Same thing with SIBO, or in dog terms, small intestinal dysbiosis. That's where there's bacteria overgrowth in the small intestines, not where it should be. We love fermented food. Fermented food is extremely great for a diverse microbiome. However, we don't want to use fermented food with small intestinal dysbiosis, because the ferment actually exacerbates all those issues and can create a longer recovery period. And I could go on and on and on. So when people say, oh, well, what do you do? Well, what's the underlying issue? And somebody had a great question on diagnostics for this, and for SIDS, for LPS. I actually spoke with Keto Pet Sanctuary to see if they're going to be testing for metabolic endotoxemia. I know with cancer patients, you don't have much time, you're just going to go. But with dogs that I have, where we're looking at atopic dermatitis, that's not a life and death issue as opposed to cancer. That's something that people who just want to start cycling their dogs onto ketosis should probably test this. And there aren't tests. I know there's a blood test, LPS and LBP, for human, where you do a meal challenge and you have to wait 3 hours. I'm sure it's shorter because the dog's digestive tract is shorter. So anyway, I don't know about diagnostic. If I could open a diagnostic company, I would just have so many diagnostics for all of this, because if we can test and measure, then we can calculate and fix everything much better. But this is all coming out with the new research into the microbiome, with the 16S RNA, and I believe Texas A&M has some dysbiotic diagnostics. So you can check out their website, or I'll put a link to that. So unfortunately, we're not rolling in money, so we can't do all these tests. We have to pick and choose where we're going to put our money. We're putting our money towards the food, and we're putting our money towards supplements and therapeutics that are going to contribute to the end goal. If we had, endless amount, I would absolutely do diagnostics for all of these. We are contributing to diagnostics with animal biome, and for people who do this, I think it's a very important mission. I see it as equivalent to the human microbiome project is the animal biome project, and what Holly and her team are doing there. So if any of you are thinking about doing an FMT, you can get a package where you take their poop sample prior to therapy, and you send that in, and they'll get the diagnostics on that. You do your 30-day FMT, and then you send in your last sample after the 30-day of FMT, and they'll be able to start getting the pattern that we already pretty much have with humans. We can pick out patterns and say, these are indicators of dysbiosis, of certain kind of chronic diseases, which we've very clearly outlined outlined in humans, and there's still so much to learn, but we don't have that robust research in dogs and cats. So that's what they're doing. If you're going to do an FMT, please consider doing the before and after sample to help them get the data that's needed so that we can help identify and cure a lot of these dogs. In addition to the woman who became obese from the FMT from her obese daughter, there have been other side effects which are very interesting, and I'll put the research up for that. A couple men who had alopecia actually had hair regrowth after their FMTs. The pictures are pretty striking. These men went in for, I think one was colitis or Crohn's, and maybe the other was C. diff. And within, they started getting patches of hair back, and then within a year it grew back. So really, the potential here is incredible, especially when researchers start to identify which strands of bacteria do what. Until then, we can CYA by getting as diverse a microbiome as possible to ensure that the bacteria is there to do all those essential functions that are needed to have a high-functioning body. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of studies on humans with FMTs. So what about dogs? We know that animals have been doing this. Also, in I think Switzerland or Sweden, they've been doing FMTs in their cattle and sheep for hundreds of years. So this actual practice isn't as maybe taboo as we see it in the United States. Now, there have been some very interesting canine studies. The most recent one that just came out in March of 2018 was using FMT with puppies that have parvo, and it decreased the severity and duration of parvo when the puppies had FMT. And I believe there was another research study, and I'll put these up when I can find them and crank them out before this video comes up. They used FMTs with puppies and again with diarrhea. So if you remember in the first video, I said in humans, we prime the immune system with bacteria in the environment, and children under the age of 3 that have several courses of antibiotics can have permanent and lifelong damage to the microbiome where they just can't regrow or have those essential bacteria in their gut microbiota. Antibiotic use in puppy, what's the comparative age? And I was doing more research, and we don't exactly have that age where we say, okay, by 3 years old, children, our microbiome is pretty much set. So you actually want to expose them to as much dirt and crap without killing them as possible by the time your child is 3 years old. And that's called the hygiene hypothesis, which has incredible traction and support in research. I mean, that we prime our immune system by exposing it to bacteria and germs. So living these isolated, extra clean lives, your children will be 80% more likely to grow up with an autoimmune disease such as asthma or allergies, whereas we call it the farm effect. Children who grow up on farms, where all that yucky salmonella and E. coli is, have a much more robust immune system, are 80% less likely to ever have any of the autoimmune diseases that are plagued by our Western culture. So something to think about with humans, but also really important for our pets. We're said, oh, don't let your puppy's paws touch the ground, until they have all their shots. And we basically put them in this bubble, and we have these wiped down homes, and we wonder why allergies are now the #1 reason that pet parents visit their vet. Well, we're doing everything that we know sets them up for a lifetime of allergies. When we get puppies, they go to farms, they go on nature hikes, they roll in all kinds of junk. I mean, we don't take them to CAFO and expose them to MRSA. But there's definitely a benefit to building up their immune system and letting them, play around in dirt, not dirt with glyphosate and pesticides and chemicals that will destroy bacteria, but like really just natural, great SBOs and such. Those were a couple canine studies, and of course there's N1 studies all over the place that are people are doing these things. Our rescue has actually used FMTs because I've done them in dire cases, but it's really expensive because you have to clear your donor. I mean, you can create massive issues, as you can see with the woman who became obese, if you don't clear your donor, and you have to clear mentally as well because of the bidirectional relationship between the gut and the brain via the vagus nerve. There's tons of research coming in that realm. So all those people who are like, oh, diet has nothing to do with behavior, you watch the science there and it's coming. And you know, what's the number one way to change our microbiome, our gut microbiome? It's through diet. There's some research that shows we can take germ-free mice and we can give them an FMT from an extremely anxious mouse. We'll create an anxious mouse. We can take a FMT from a bold mouse who's more adventurous and put it in a germ-free mouse, and that mouse will become more bold and adventurous. Lots of incredible research in that realm. You're going to have an FMT, you should ask questions by any company that's doing this. Have they been temperament tested and evaluated? Look for hereditable diseases, and of course you have to look for pathogenic and worms and such. Oh, worms. I'm going to be talking about worms. I have a whole video on worms. Helminth therapy, that's going to be fun. That's what we're doing. We're working with Animal Biome. We got a 30-day FMT. They clean and prep, you know, it's poop in a pill.